Hello, and welcome to Bridging the Gap, an educational series on how to better understand mental health within a religious context. Over the next several weeks, we will seek to destigmatize mental health struggles that occur within our churches and communities. While there is no universally accepted definition of mental illness, there is a universal acceptance of the proposition that your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Mental illness is usually thought of as an abnormal change in your emotions, thought processes, and behaviors. It may not be as visible as some physical illnesses are, but it is just as important to seek treatment. Just like a common cold has a variety of causes and symptoms, various factors contribute to a person's struggle with mental illness, which may manifest in different signs among different people. Unlike any physical ailment, there can come a point where professional medical help is needed to address a mental health crisis. Currently, most practitioners use classification guides to categorize the vast number of known mental illnesses, such as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and the International Classification of Disorders. Future videos within this series will focus on some specific and more common mental health issues, such as anxiety and depression.
I think it's wider than just the idea of a stigma. I think is wider than just the churches. So within a family I know, it's a family that has been touched by poor mental health, sometimes quite serious poor mental health, and you don't have to go very far back in the generations before it was something that was never talked about. If someone ended up going through depression, you just kind of hid it away as a family, you didn't discuss it. If someone, say, committed suicide, if it got to that level, then often their death would never be kind of spoken about, or they'd certainly never reveal that they committed suicide because of mental health problems. It was just closed down, you just did not talk about it, with the idea that poor mental health was something to be ashamed of, which is ridiculous, because we're not ashamed when you need a hip transplant or you get flu or things like that. I'm not sure why, but perhaps because mental health was so poorly understood. So we grew with the idea that mental health was something to be ashamed of, and within British culture you don't have to go back very far. And so you will still have people of older generations who have that idea that mental health is something to be ashamed of, you don't talk about. I think within churches too, perhaps within British churches, that idea can still be prominent, because a lot of our churches are made up of the older generations who've perhaps carried those ideas. I think it's very different within the younger generation. And just with the idea that, as Christians, we're meant to be sorted. We've got Jesus. We've got all. We've got everything. So we're not allowed to be sad, or we're not allowed to be anxious, because if we're anxious or sad, we're not being a good Christian. And I think that's something we need to challenge as well, to recognise that we all go through difficult points in our lives, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not being a good Christian.
As we've seen from the perspective of a minister, there is a current issue with mental illness being a stigma within church congregations. The stigma surrounding the discussion of mental illness has been known to lead to judgment and toxicity within congregations. One of the biggest aims of this series is to lessen that stigma so that other people coping with a mental health issue do not have the same experience that I did. I grew up in a Baptist church in Pennsylvania. It was a fairly traditional church with a really small congregation and a strict fundamental approach to sermons. When I was around the age of 11, I was dealing with some mental health issues that were the result of the death of a close relative and some bullying that was happening at my new school. I tried to confide in the leaders of my church and youth group about the struggles I was facing, and instead of opening a dialogue or helping me through the help I needed, the following week a new series began at my youth group. It addressed mental illness with the stance that any mental illness was a sin because the person's true joy was not found in Jesus. That kind of mentality is extremely harmful for a person dealing with a mental health issue. It places blame on the individual for something that they cannot control. As a church family, it is important to recognize that, like any illness, mental illness is not a choice, so there should be no sense of blame. My story is unfortunately familiar to a lot of people who have felt judged by their religious community for their mental health. I do not believe that the judgment comes from a place of hate, rather a lack of education as to what mental illness is, who it can affect, and the process of recovery. By providing information about those facets of mental health to church leaders and members, we hope to help bridge the gap between mental health care and members of religious communities.
Over the next several weeks, we will, oh, dang. Okay, just keep rolling. I'll just redo it. Hello, and well, oh, that was bad, hello. Illness, there is a universal, that's what I'm saying, I can't not. Emotions, thought processes, why was, thought processes, okay.